Hey, it's Matt Robison. And here's our latest episode of Political Rehab, our mashup of PTI meets The Daily Show, where a Republican and a Democrat try our best to have a good time with the week's news. And this episode was previously recorded.
The people who decide elections don't see this as a victory. They see it as chaos.
This is pure political garbage theater, and they don't have the facts or the law on their side, so they're pounding the table.
If you're a conservative, what should scare the hell out of you is what's the next administration?
He doesn't see dissent, he sees disloyalty. Everything is an exploitation opportunity. Welcome to Political Rehab, smart politics without the hangover. I'm Matt.
And I'm Matt.
Today, the whole world nervously eyeing the United States, the Trump prosecutor's dramatic testimony, DOGE dumb data deep dive disgusting Democrats, and a wild attack on blue states. But let's start, as always, with our Trump dump.
Time for the Trump dump.
That's right. It's time for the Trump dump, our weekly segment where we just go off on something that happened this week with Donald Trump. Because if you're a Republican, Democrat, Independent, it doesn't matter. There's something he did that pissed you off.
And you know what pissed me off this week? And here we go again moment. A parade of world heavyweights marching into the White House to do one thing and get one predictable response. We actually have secretly recorded hidden camera footage of it right here.
All right, thanks so much for the gift, you little bitch. Now get out of here.
Yep, that's about right. Medals, luxury jets, gold plaques, massive media deals. It has just been one thing after another. People walking in to lick his boots. We had social media exploding with images of Trump accepting trophies from children, Olympic medals. Back in August, Apple CEO Tim Cook visited the Oval Office to tout a new $100 billion manufacturing and supply chain expansion, maybe, and presented Trump with a custom plaque made from Apple glass on a 24-karat gold base. Amazon's MGM Studios paid $40 million for the documentary Melania, a Brett Ratner-directed bomb that follows the world's least interesting person. And of course, we can't forget Qatar's government providing a luxury Boeing 747, sometimes called a flying palace, valued at around $400 million. But this week, a true moment of abasement as Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, who won the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize, walked into the Oval Office and handed Trump literally her Nobel Peace Prize. Now, he doesn't actually have the prize. The Nobel Committee has qualified. You can't hand over the actual title of being the Nobel Peace Prize winner, but this was a symbolic thank you and an attempt, a pretty ham-handed attempt to try to influence Trump. Please, sir, please make me the president now that you've committed coup. Look, all of this reveals what a petty little pocket tyrant Trump is, a soulless succubus with a bottomless pit of need for flattery and trinkets that would make the spawn of the devil look balanced by comparison. All of this line of suck-uppery does is make him look hollow, brittle, stupid, and weak.
Yeah, I went a little bit different direction. Let me tell you what's really starting to piss me off right here. I am tired of hearing so-called conservatives insisting that Trump is some master negotiator, that he's playing 4D chess while the rest of us just don't understand his brilliance. Art of the deal. That's all I hear. Look, it's been a few years since I read The Art of the Deal, but I don't think it was do something unhinged, bully allies over something, damage America's reputation, make no actual progress, repackage the status quo as a breakthrough, and declare victory. That's not negotiating. That's throwing a temper tantrum. That's what children do. Look, we got a framework for a deal on Greenland, which means everything is exactly the same, but in a nice, new, bright package. I don't want Russia or China to have Greenland, but that's a false choice. They're a NATO ally. And let's be honest, China and Russia are not about to launch an invasion of Greenland. We are still the biggest, strongest military power on earth. No, best I can tell that this was all about Trump was mad because he didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize. So he threw a temper tantrum. Norway took away his prize, so he's going to take away Greenland. Watch out, Hollywood. If Melania the movie doesn't win Best Picture, be prepared for tanks rolling down Sunset Boulevard. And the reason this matters and the reason why this is my Trump dump this week is the people who decide elections don't see this as a victory. They see it as chaos. They watch the stock market drop. They watch allies threaten to become enemies. They don't see 3D chess. They see 52 card pickup and America's left picking up the mess.
I would really hope that the Trump dump that both of us just accomplished would be the last we would hear of these topics. But I have a feeling that they may be coming back in this week's rundown. Trump is back. Tell a friend. And especially if your friend happens to be in NATO, because he descended on the Davos conference this week in order to sow fear, menacing, uncertainty. He essentially executed a global trust fall exercise, coming and saying, all right, I'm probably not going to invade Greenland, although maybe we'll do a thing called attack. And he then said, we demand immediate negotiations, meaning give me what I want or else. All of this has left our former allies eyeing each other nervously and wondering what the hell is next. Matt, what the hell is next? Where does this leave the world?
Great question. I mean, look, peace through strength requires steadiness, not spectacle. And I think the real thing we saw here in Davos was just the world is wondering, is America policy now driven with grievance rather than strategy? Is it really America's unpredictability in the world? If we are going to be the freedom-seeking country for the world, we can't act like little children. And what made it even worse is when you get down to Davos in the first speech he gave, sound like just a rehash of his White House press room briefing that was just full of just randomness. We talked about election fraud. We talked about the Federal Reserve. It feels like America's allies are really pulling back and waiting for a world where we are no longer the leader. And that's sad. As a conservative, I've long believed, and I think a lot of us long believe, that we have a responsibility in the world. And I think Trump is just blowing that up for whatever reason at this point.
I think the difference between you and me as a Republican and a Democrat 20 years ago would have been captured in the parody movie Team America World Police. There was this George W. Bush-esque view. That really was our role, and it was a muscular, hawkish foreign policy. But at its core, we seem to believe, I think, across party lines, in a similar vision for the United States role in the world. And the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, at Davos, really took a dose of truth serum and just laid it all out. He basically said, I'm not going to pretend that the global order that the United States set up and maintained in the decades since World War II was a win for everybody, that it was without flaws, that it wasn't advantaging the powerful countries at the expense of the less powerful. But it did a heck of a lot more to protect those without power than anything else that's been come up with before or since. And it fundamentally benefited the United States and the Western alliance. That is what Trump has undermined in the past few weeks, in the year since he resumed office. And that's what's at stake now. The entire setup that the U.S. has benefited so much from, and that Donald Trump has driven a harpoon through on his way to trying to spear some polar bears.
Yeah. Changing gears a little bit. Jack Smith is testifying before Congress this week. This was an absolute made-for-TV spectacle. But at the end of it, it really highlights the GOP problem right now. You know, look, as a Republican, as a conservative, do I think Fani Willis or Letitia James had a vendetta against Trump? Yeah, of course they did. They ran on this. And from where I sit, it does look like Jack Smith had a target and that he was out to prove that Trump was guilty. But let me be clear, that doesn't mean Trump wasn't guilty. He was. And so rather than accept the defeat in the 2020 presidential election, he engaged in a scheme to try to overturn and stop the transition of power. And if he didn't want to be investigated, he shouldn't have called for his vice president to be hung. He should have used the National Guard to control the crowd. Hell knows he likes using the National Guard right now. He probably shouldn't have taken secret documents to Mar-a-Lago. So when you look at all this, Trump is guilty of this. Right now, what we're seeing is performative. It's an audience for one. It's Donald Trump. And so everything we're seeing there is just all smoke and mirrors. And so I guess my question to you, Matt, is are we stop investigating facts? Or we're stopping to look into things? Or really, is Congress really just about shaping a storyline? Because that's what it feels like to me.
This is a show. This is talk about political witch hunt. That's the entire purpose of the Republican Party. Your friends these days, since it's a Trump protection racket, is to gaslight the rest of us as lustily as they possibly can by inverting. They're saying like, oh, this was a witch hunt of Donald Trump. No, now you're perpetrating a witch hunt of Jack Smith. There's an old saw in legal circles. If you have the facts on your side, pound the facts. If you have the law on your side, pound the law. And if you have neither the facts nor the law on your side, pound the table. And that is, of course, what Jim Jordan did, what James Comer did, what the entire Republican Party enablement mechanism has been doing about Jack Smith and these investigations. And look, I am a judicial system purist. I believe that matters of law should be tried in the judicial system and only in the judicial system and not through the media. In this case, though, what Donald Trump did is very plain on video. It is not in dispute. And so what the Republicans are essentially left with is being trotted out, being forced to walk this plank for something that is very obviously true and very obviously wrong in order to protect their mafioso boss. And I honestly feel sad for them, but no, in no sense is this an investigation in any way. This is pure political garbage theater, and they don't have the facts or the law on their side, so they're pounding the table.
I wish I could say that you're wrong, but it's 100% true. And none of this is going to save Donald Trump, because at the end of the day, the audience they're trying to get is Trump to love them so they don't challenge him in primaries, but it's not going to change anything because American public has seen what they've seen.
Keeping on the same theme of the Donald Trump crime family, we have to talk about a new report from Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, one of the most tortured acronyms out there. It's CREW. Makes me think Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch. They have a new report just detailing the billions of dollars of wealth that Trump and his sons and the daughters that he'll acknowledge, not including Tiffany, have managed to accrue through disgustingly underhanded and corrupt means. I assume that you're in favor of this, Matt?
There's so many problems here. Let's start with this one.
Yeah,
First
wait,
of all,
you're going to limit yourself to one?
To just one. I have a time limit. So we spent last year before that pounding on the table. Look at Hunter Biden. He's selling access to the White House. Now we're just doing it in plain sight. A New York Times editorial board went in and looked at how much money Donald Trump and his organizations have made just since he's assumed the presidency. And you combine that with what the children are making, you combine with what you talked about in your Trump dump with open gifts that they are giving to this administration. The grift, the corruption is wide open out there, and Republicans are saying nothing. But it goes into this real problem that I think we have, is that we just don't seem to care as Republicans when it's our side. And then we can't understand why voters kick us out of office, and we can't seem to understand why they don't trust us anymore.
Can I say something nice about Republicans? Oh,
yes,
boy.
please.
That was going to be rough. I don't know. I'm going to do my best.
There's one thing, I'm sure.
I believe that Republicans are inherently no more corrupt than Democrats. I do not believe that your average Republican congressman, politician, whatever, is more apt to become corrupt than your average Democrat. We're all in this together. That said, what the entire Republican Party apparatus, as I said a moment ago, has done around Donald Trump, it's often described as gaslighting. It's described as making you question the evidence of your own senses. I think it goes a little bit further than this. And I'm sorry, I am going to have to throw a dart at you and your party here. It's swift boating. It's attacking the opposition for that of which you yourself are guilty. And so the entire purpose of the Hunter Biden attack was to inoculate Trump by getting there first on, oh, you're corrupt. You're running a corrupt crime family. And now that he's been in office for the last year, he has blown all the charges, which were mostly unsubstantiated about Hunter Biden, out of the water up and down, and there's no defense for it.
There really isn't. And the problem is when you're a party that runs as good government and you run as rule of law, but then you blatantly break that promise to the American people, you lose elections. Let me get into something that I think is even a little bit more scary. There's a report this week that from court filing Department of Justice that DOGE had access to sensitive and shared sensitive Social Security Administration data without agency oversight. Now, this was a classic move by the DOJ. They hid it in the cover of darkness. It doesn't get a lot of fanfare because why would it? We're invading Greenland. We're going to take it. We're going to do whatever. We're starting wars. So, of course, this doesn't sit there. But here's why this bothers me. And I think most Americans would be surprised how much data as a political operation we have. But there is a move within the federal government to begin to consolidate every piece of data that we have. So everything from your voting history to your Social Security to your gun registration in one centralized place. And so when you end up with a federal government with that much information and access to your information in one place, that creates some real security concerns. As a small government conservative, that scares the hell out of me. So, Matt, the question I pose on this one, is it government efficiency or government surveillance? You know where I'm coming from. This is government surveillance.
Let me just say, duh, it's government surveillance. But look, I can agree. Here's another instance where you and I are on the same page, but maybe for slightly different reasons. I share your conservative orientation toward privacy, individual rights, a fear of government power and government overreach. I'm on board with all of those, but the Democrat in me eyes this extra suspiciously because of the potential use case to fuck around with elections. That's what really sets me up for a nightmare scenario. The ability to identify individual American citizens, identify them as voters, and to use it as part of this efficiency unit to try to drum people off of voter rolls and muck around with elections. There's so much suspicion already about what the true agenda is. Every denial that DOGE and Musk and Trump has issued has been transparently false. And so it's really left the door wide open for speculation about their true motives. And I would not put this past them. I think only a very gullible person would say, oh, that's a little far-fetched for this administration. So yes, that's just one of the creative uses to this deep data, this scary amount of personal data on Americans could be put. And it should worry Republicans and Democrats equally.
Well, without question. And I think the issue with the data too is just, a government's going to use it. If you're a conservative, what should scare the hell out of you is what's the next administration going to do? We can already speculate what this one's going to do, but the next one and the one after that, when they have every piece of information to you next to it, you just don't know what's happening. And again, I want smaller, less government, not a more intrusive government.
Speaking of intrusive government, you're going to absolutely love this next story. The Trump administration has directed federal agencies to undertake an unprecedented comprehensive review of federal spending in a group of, wait for it, Democratic-led states. I'm shocked to discover that they would do something so transparently politically motivated. This comes as part of a broader campaign by the administration to punish sanctuary policies and generally assert executive control over federal spending selectively in states that are run by Democrats. This seems good, maybe? We're going to do a thing called extortion. My Trump isn't very good. Is this close? It's other than yeah? Is this anything other than extortion?
No, it's extortion, but it is targeting states that are political adversaries. And look, you can go through a lot of these states and there are problems, and there are significant problems in there. And I've lived in some of the states that have these sanctuary cities. It's a mess. And I personally don't think you should have sanctuary cities. But here's what I also personally know for a fact is that states get to make those decisions. It's the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. And so the fact that we have an overreaching federal government that is now trying to overtake, I think, is a real problem. One of the things I wrote in my column this week was that when Reagan looked at America, he saw a country rooted in liberty, anchored in the rule of law, boundless opportunity. Trump sees enemies. Trump does not see a free people. He doesn't see dissent. He sees disloyalty. He doesn't see a republic to serve. He sees a country to command. And I think efforts like this of trying to use the federal government to strong arm states that are against him is un-American.
Fire Kimmel, or we'll look into your licenses. Pull the segments I don't like, or you won't get the merger that you have asked for. Yes, I love that. I love that idea of he doesn't see dissent, he sees disloyalty. Everything is an exploitation opportunity like Greenland or a power display. Of course, this is deeply disturbing. And what's interesting to me about it is that, like with most things involving Trump, you take Greenland, for example, there's a kernel of something you can hang your hat on to, right? And Mike Johnson sure as hell tried when it came to Greenland this week. There are rare earth minerals there, and there are some military needs there. It has nothing to do with the whole push to take over Greenland, but there is a kernel of truth. And if Trump were to say, I'm a little concerned about spending, and Democrats and Republicans for a long time, I can say this, I used to, as a former congressional staffer, there is a little bit of a mutual, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. Let's try to shrink the size of government by getting a handle on that. There's a kernel of truth in that. That's not what this is. This is extortion.
This is extortion. You're exactly right.
All right. Speaking of your new column, we're going to talk about it in our fun segment, Hot Off the Presses.
It's time for Hot Off the Presses.
I'm a writer. This is the segment of the show where we talk about the stuff we're writing. And let's start with your column from Tuesday of this past week. Tell us a little bit about it. You just alluded to it a moment ago. You want to talk about Ronald Reagan. You really like Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, I do. I think for a lot of people who grew up in this generation, we see Ronald Reagan as our beacon, our guiding light. It was the first time we saw conservatism ushered in, and we saw everything that layered against it. And you're right. I wrote an article this weekend in which I essentially pitted Reagan's America versus Trump's America. And I wanted to look at what 1 year of Trump 2.0 looks, and there's a lot of things that we can get into, and we'll get into this conversation further. But at the heart of it is there are two very different visions. And I think when you look at Trump 2.0, you have to look at two things. You have to look at what Trump has done while in office. And when you look at the policies, they're not Republican. You look at DOGE, for example, could have been something that was a move towards limited government, smaller government, blew up, nothing happened. You can look at tariffs and they're just taxes. You can look at the socialism of Trump accounts. You go policy by policy, and the reality is Trump is not a Republican. But the other side of this is that what Mike Johnson and Republicans in Congress have done has been a complete abandonment of Republican principles as well. And whether it's executive orders or just standing up to right and wrong as far as the authoritarian impulses of Trump, what I've really looked at and what I examined in this article, which you can find on my Substack as well, is just this is a very different, and it's time for Republicans to get back to the party of Reagan, especially if we want to win. But right now, we've just abandoned all principles, and that's an issue for America.
Look, I disagree with much of Ronald Reagan's policy approach. I think it's been pretty well demonstrated at this point, for example, that the Laffer curve is bullshit. Boy, I should do that as a segment on That's Bullshit, right? That you don't actually get more revenue out of tax cuts. Sam Brownback proved that painfully, pretty definitively in his experiment in Kansas. And the list could certainly go on. But I will give Ronald Reagan credit, and by extension, the Republican Party that you grew up in, credit for a certain way of operating, for being able to do business with House Speaker Tip O'Neill, for being able to advance some important pieces of legislation that were bipartisan. For example, the Immigration Act of 1986, which was largely successful and bipartisan. So the way he operated, the way he spoke to the American people, there was a national malaise, as Jimmy Carter observed, that Ronald Reagan helped us to coming out of the Watergate, Vietnam era. And he had moments of genuine eloquence and moral leadership that we benefited from. When the Challenger space shuttle exploded, and he referred in a nationwide primetime address that night to the astronauts walking up to their ship before they slip the surly bonds of Earth and touch the face of God. I still get choked up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peggy Noonan, for penning those lines. There were moments of genuine leadership that I can admire, and I can understand how, even though many of the policy and philosophical positions that Republicans adopted over the years, Republicans like you, even though they're diametrically opposed to what I believe, I can also respect them.
Right.
Now, there are deep problems there. Ron Contra, for example, Oliver North, not exactly a clean bill of health. However, it all pales in comparison to what has become of the Republican Party, in your words, under Trump, a protection racket for the president, cheering what it should be stopping and excusing what it should be condemning. This is not oversight, it is surrender. And, look, in that vein, just to bring the attention onto myself for a second here.
Look at me. I
think it's a natural segue.
It is.
To what I wrote in Newsweek this week, which is Trump has gone, it's not just that he's gone beyond the pale, beyond what can be tolerated on corruption. It's that he's gone beyond what can be tolerated on mental capacity and cognitive togetherness. He is mentally incapacitated. I think it's beyond doubt. What I wrote up in Newsweek in an article that I also printed on my Substack this week is removing Trump via the 25th Amendment is virtually impossible. But should Democrats push for it anyway? And what I lay out is just how profound his cognitive incapacity, his mental disorder has become, how manifest it's become, how obvious it's become to medical professionals, but really to all of us, anyone who doesn't have MAGA fever. And it sets up this question that's been widespread on the internet this week. Shouldn't we be putting pressure on his cabinet to remove him via the 25th Amendment, Section 4? And what I lay out is that can't happen. It is impossible. It is not practically possible. And if you want to know more, you can look at the article. But the question that I set up is, should Democrats push for it anyway? Because to hold back, even if it's politically smart, even if it's practical, to hold back requires an act of your own mental subversion as much as what you're charging the Republican Party with. It requires us all to accept that the emperor is wearing clothes, to not talk about his insanity, and to just watch it all go by while we bite our tongues. And I'm not sure that that's something that we can morally or politically sustain.
No, yeah, I think you're 100% correct on this. And I think I think this is the value of this show, is we get a chance from two separate perspectives to have these honest, real conversations on things that I think that a lot of Americans are looking out and saying. I read your article. You gave me a preview of this thing before you put it up, and it's excellent. It's an excellent article.
Oh, thank you.
And I think these are conversations that Americans are looking at. Look, I think the reality is Trump has become a joke. He's become a national punchline. The rambling at the White House press briefing, the Davos, even going back to accepting the Nobel Peace Prize, everybody feels like they're just laughing at him. And they're kind of looking at him as the crazy uncle who just says weird stuff. But I think we've moved past that. I think most Americans are now taking a look at this and just saying there's something seriously wrong. I do think we have a problem in America right now on the way we're nominating and bringing people in. We're now in the second aging president where we have questions about their mental health. The biggest problem I think we had with Joe Biden in this is, was he going to fall asleep in meetings? Biggest problem we have with Trump is now, which country is he going to invade? And those are significantly different. And I think that's why there need to be significantly conversations.
That's such a good point, by the way. That's such a good point,
Right.
Because I hear this when I do my live stream. I get mostly trolls and some bots showing up, and their only defense of Trump at this point is, oh, whataboutism. It's what about Biden? It's, yeah, okay, he was sleepy. And you could almost forgive Trump wandering off on the prime minister of Japan, which he did, and going into bizarre rambles about snakes, except they're happening more and more in a context of he's going into this bizarre window gazing episode. in the middle of a high-powered, high-stakes White House meeting to decide the future of Venezuela, an entire country,
Right.
hundreds of billions, millions of lives on the line. This is, again, this can't be sustained. And you're writing about this right now as well.
Well, I am. And look, one more thing on this. What about it? This is what drives me insane. And it could actually be my Trump dump, or it could be a good bullshit segment, is why is that our standard? Why have we accepted that? Like, why in the world is that our answer to it? No, everybody should just be pissed off. And so what I'm writing about this week, because of a lot of the same, and a lot of the same of where you're coming from, and I'm going to bring it back to Reagan. Reagan in 1960 gave a great speech, his entrance into it, called The Time for Choosing. It's the famous rendezvous with destiny line for all of us. And I frame it this week that Republicans, we're facing our own time for choosing right now. Is that we are looking at this. We've been told for so long, we have to just accept the nonsense from Trump because he wears the same jersey. But the truth is, that isn't the choice. The choice is that we have to start having a serious conversation about his fitness for office. We have to have these conversations. We owe it to America. And that's how history is going to judge us on this. I asked the question, will Republicans show leadership and take their oath to defend the Constitution seriously? Or will they be remembered as cowards that let, and I quote Reagan again, the greatest nation in the world, the last best hope of man on earth, be diminished and consigned to the ash heap of history? Republicans, and I specifically did not say Republicans in Congress. This is all Republicans. This is because if you want change, you want your member of Congress to listen, I need Republicans to stand up and start to say enough is enough. I need Republicans to say, this is not right. This is not who we are. I recognize that if he is removed from office, we at J.D. Vance. I'm not a fan of J.D. Vance. Everybody who watches this show knows I am not a fan of J.D. Vance. But the one thing about J.D. Vance is I don't think he's in cognitive decline. I think Donald Trump, I think there are some real serious issues, and the decision he makes now could set off problems for generations. And Republicans, we owe it to our country to do this. We owe it to America to have these conversations and to start expressing those concerns out loud in public with our members of Congress so that they can finally grow a backbone and do what's right.
Let's make that the last word on our hot off the presses segment and turn to this week's edition of That's Bullshit.
Bullshit. Bullshit. Bullshit.
Bullshit.
Bullshit?
For this week's edition of That's Bullshit, I'm going to do something a little different because what we're about to talk about goes beyond mere bullshit. I want to take you back to what occurred on January 6th, 2021. 140 police officers were injured, many of them severely and very much intentionally. Police were trying to defend our elected leaders, including Vice President Mike Pence, who the mob was threatening to hang as members of Congress were literally running for their lives. It's in that context that a new article from the Washington Post appeared this week titled, "They Ransacked the U.S. Capitol and Want the Government to Pay Them Back." And as I describe this to you, I want you to think about the disconnect between what these people are saying and what actually happened and their role in it. Yvonne St. Cyr pushed against police barricades, crawled through a broken window in the U.S. Senate, and yelled, "Push, push, push," to fellow rioters in a hallway where police officers suffered concussions and broken bones. A federal judge sentenced her to 30 months in prison and imposed $2,270 in financial penalties. She insisted she did nothing wrong, and when President Donald Trump pardoned her, along with almost 1,600 other people who had been convicted of crimes for their actions on January 6th, she went to court seeking a refund. "It's my money," she said. "They took my money." Stacey Hager took videos and photos of himself roaming through the Capitol, literally documenting his own crime, and was convicted on 4 misdemeanor charges, for which he paid $570 in penalties. He said, "You tell me why I shouldn't be entitled to getting my money back. The government took my money from me for doing the right thing." Doing the right thing. Doing the right thing. A Utah man was forced by the court to forfeit $63,000 he made from selling videos recording some of the worst violence at the Capitol, recording videos that amount to snuff films of police officers being beaten and in fear of their lives. He wants his money back. He thinks he's entitled to make money for documenting savage assaults that left 4 police officers with such deep psychological trauma that they committed suicide. Andrew Take attacked police officers with bear spray and a whip-like weapon. For what it's worth, this is what it looks like when someone is sprayed with bear spray. But the man who bear sprayed and whipped police officers and left one officer with a lifelong scar, and who, by the way, pleaded guilty to assaulting law enforcement officers using a dangerous weapon, this person is now suing the federal government for $2.5 million, claiming his civil rights were violated. That's where we are. It's not just that violent criminals have been pardoned. It's not just that they're asking for their money back. It's that they literally want to be paid for their crime.
Another great segment. Again, I love these things.
From the lowest valley to the highest mountaintop, let's turn to our dose of hope.
After nearly a year of doing almost nothing, Congress is showing some signs of life. In just the past week, we've seen bipartisan votes on government funding, a rare bipartisan vote on war powers, and even a bipartisan vote to hold the Clintons in contempt. Now, bipartisanship doesn't necessarily mean good. Conservatives have long worried that bipartisanship means compromising on values. But let's face it, right now, Republicans in Congress don't seem to have any values, so there's not much they could compromise on. So doing something, anything, is just a ray of hope. Now, let's be honest what's happening here. It's an election year. Suddenly, lawmakers remember they have voters they have to be accountable to. So it may sound cynical, but I've been in politics long enough to know that the one thing every member of Congress cares about in everything they agree on is getting reelected. So yeah, it's cynical, but it's also encouraging because this is a return to normal behavior. And for most of the last year, Congress has been frozen, trapped in partisan warfare, performative outrage, and political theater. Now, at least in flashes, we're seeing something different. Democracy doesn't always move because politicians become virtuous. Sometimes it moves because incentives change, and that's the election. And right now, the incentives are pushing Congress back towards doing its job. And in 2026, that's at least something.
For my dose of hope, it's time that we had the talk. I'm talking, of course, about the birds and the bees, and particularly the bees. Yes, this week's dose of hope, the news item, is that stingless bees from the Amazon rainforest are the first insect in the world to be granted legal rights. It's true. You can look it up. The planet's oldest bee species and primary pollinator in the Amazon rainforest just made history as the first insects anywhere in the world to be granted legal rights. The native bees have been cultivated by indigenous peoples since pre-Columbian times, and unlike their European cousins, and like the classic 80s band The Police after they went their separate ways to pursue solo projects, they have no sting. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why is this good news, Matt? After all, giving new legal rights means you've just handed lawyers the means to sue even more than they already do, which is understandable because that's what lawyers are for. It's not really their fault, but a lot more litigation isn't exactly what most of us pine for. But still, as much as I like to joke that I'm not exactly an environmental warrior, I used to warn colleagues on Capitol Hill that I was going to try to tweak the libs by walking into environmental meetings, smoking a squirrel. We need the bees, damn it. Stingless bees face threats from climate change, deforestation, pesticides, and competition from other bee species. Bee species with stings, I'll add. Scientists have been racing to get them on conservation red lists, and we need pollinators. If you like to eat food, and since these bees lack a natural sting, I think it's only fitting that we give them an artificial one in the courts. At the very least, this raises the delicious prospect of seeing a hapless lawyer try to depose bees or get them to sign affidavits. In all seriousness, pollinators matter, preserving endangered species matters, and I happen to like the idea of giving a little leg up, wing up, to the stingless bee cousins. So I'll look forward to them having their day in court. And on that very sharp, pointed note, for Matt, I'm Matt. We'll see you next time.